Remedy Sessions Chapter 3, Sudden Downpour. The stormy weather had come to Green Hills quickly. If the sounds of thunder and rain becoming more frequent wasn't an indicator, the constant calls of fallen trees blocking roads or damaging property were the dead giveaway. It had only been over 2 weeks, and Tom was already over the weather. Luckily for Sheriff Wachowski, he'd have help in the form of an Elena. While before, he was perfectly capable of handling the damage with the simple use of his pickup truck and tow cables and organizing for proper removal. Having a super-powered teenager lift and punch trees into pieces was highly convenient. Initially, Tom didn't plan on even considering Knuckles to assist him, but the young Ichida insisted and wanted to help. And that's how it's been for the time being. Knuckles would accompany Tom whenever he was called out, while Sonic and Tails would stay home with Maddie, reluctantly in Sonic's case. However, for the past couple of days, she had noticed that Knuckles was acting a bit off. She couldn't quite figure it out, but she knew something was wrong. Yet he brushed it off and claimed he was fine whenever she asked. Of course, she wanted to respect his privacy and not overstep boundaries, but the feeling wouldn't shake her. While the storms had died down since last night, rain and thunder remained and were coming down, rather heavy but not hectic, so hopefully, it wouldn't cause any issues for Tom while on the road. They had left shortly this morning after getting another call from Wade about fallen trees creating more roadblocks, leaving Maddie with the 2 boys, which would have been an equally troublesome job if Sonic was still antsy and needy to go outside. Thankfully, the weather had soothed the hedgehog into a peaceful nap while watching TV. Tails, however, was anything but relaxed. The poor kid was practically jumping out of his fur at every roar of thunder. When the storms had started, he had inadvertently revealed that he was quite frightened of thunder. The sudden shrieks of fear, the shaking, and the many nights he'd be huddled in the same bed as one of his brothers or even in Maddie and Tom's. Needless to say, the last few days, Tails has been a bit on edge.
There you go. That feel better?
She asked the little fox, her smile matching the warmth of the blanket she wrapped around Tails.
A lot, thanks, Miss Maddie.
A sheepish smile came from the little yellow fox. He was still getting used to not calling the Wachowski couple Mr. and Mrs. after they insisted so many times. Maddie softly booped Tails on the nose, and then gave many head strokes to Ozzy, who sat snuggled in between Tails and the still sleeping Sonic, snoring away quietly in his slumber.
Well, while he's out cold, I'd say you have free reign over the TV.
The veterinarian woman smirked as she held up the remote, passing it to Tails as she sat down next to him. Maddie didn't have much else to do on her day off from work, so she figured she'd just settle down with the boys. Usually, she'd be doing her yoga routines at this time, but the weather was less than suitable. As they watched a documentary together, Maddie found herself thinking about Knuckles again. She just knew something was going on with him. She didn't understand why he wouldn't tell her. They had made so much progress these last few months. Did he still not trust her enough to speak to her about his problems?
Maddie.
Tails' voice spoke up, breaking her out of her train of thought.
Are you all right?
She glanced down at him, flashing a small smile.
Oh, I'm fine, sweetie.
She softly stroked the top of his head down before looking away again.
Tails, have you noticed Knuckles acting a bit off lately?
One of his ears twitched as Tails looked up at her, his eyes darting away as he thought about the question.
Well, actually, he's...
This alarmed Maddie. Did Tails know something?
I don't know if I should begin to tell you this. Mostly 'cause I don't even know the whole story, but I do think something is going on.
She said nothing, only giving the young fox an urging look to continue. If something was wrong with Knuckles, she needed to know.
Well, I've been having trouble staying asleep a lot lately, but you know that already. A few nights ago, I woke up again. I was gonna try to go back to sleep, but I heard noises from downstairs. It sounded like Knuckles. It was really muffled, but I was sure it was him.
Maddie said nothing, only nodding as she listened to the kid explain what he saw. He resumed.
I snuck downstairs to look for him, see if he was okay. The bathroom light was on and the door was left open a bit. The sounds he was making were clear, and it got more obvious that he sounded like he was in pain. He was groaning and grunting a lot but was trying to stay quiet.
This wasn't good, Maddie thought to herself. Not at all. Her expression was pensive, but her eyes filled to the brim with concern.
Did you see what he was doing? What he might done to hurt himself?
She asked, doing her best to stay calm and collected despite her worry building up by the second at the thought of Knuckles being out there while in pain.
I didn't get a good look, but I did peek through the open door.
Tails thought back to what he saw that night.
He had taken his gloves off. I can't tell what he was trying to do, but one of his hands was shaking really bad. It is his right one. I don't know what he did to it exactly. But I think he must have narrowed it somehow and was trying to fix it himself. I think I tried to act like I wasn't there, spying on him, and tried knocking and asking if he was okay, but...
Maddie winced.
Didn't go well.
Nope. He immediately closed the door on my face and wouldn't open it at all. Knuckles insisted he was fine and told me to go back to sleep. I was happy about it, but I eventually went to bed.
A look of guilt came on the fox's face as his ears lowered.
I kept thinking I should have woken you up that night, but I don't know, I just didn't. I really should have.
It's okay, sweetie.
Maddie gave a soft smile, cupping his cheeks and rubbing them gingerly.
You told me now, and I'm really glad that you did. Thank you for telling me.
She knew it. She knew something was bothering Knuckles, but the fact it was a physical injury, and that he was in genuine pain, that hurt. Knowing that for these last few days, she could have helped him if she just knew. Why didn't he tell her? Was he ever going to plan on it, or was he keep it to himself? Maddie didn't feel it was right to sit here and wait for them. For all she knew, Knuckles could be worsening whatever injury he has right now. She didn't know how bad it was currently, but it could get so much worse for him if left untreated. She had to do something, right now. In a swift motion, Maddie jumped up from the couch, slipping the keys and a thick jacket. Even Sonic stared with how fast she was moving. Tails' gaze followed her, an ear flicking as he tiddled his head.
What are you doing?
I'm going to bring Knuckles home right now. He could be worsening whatever injury he has, and I'm not gonna sit here and let that happen.
She had quickly donned the thick coat as she spoke, and promptly walked towards the door, only to stop and quickly look back at Tails. Motherly instincts had kicked in.
Are you gonna be okay on your own? It shouldn't take me too long, but I want to be sure.
At first, he looked a little unsure, but a spark of determination filled his eyes, which just looked utterly adorable on the little fox face.
I'll be fine on fog. I'm robot, a little thunder is nothing.
He immediately jumped at another crash of thunder, but he gave a thumbs up after recovering from his little scare. Now secure in knowing two of her boys were safe, she quickly rushed out to her car. As she buckled herself in, she quickly dialed Wade.
Wade, it's Maddie. I need you to tell me where Tom and Knuckles are.
If Maddie had called Wade in advance, the sight of a car speeding towards the closed-off road would have startled him, at least even more than it already did. Once she stepped out of the car, Wade started to speak.
Geez, Maddie, we're trying to avoid accidents. You could have crashed with how slippery the roads are. What's going on with you, Tom's usually the panicky type?
I'll explain in a bit, but do you know where Knuckles is?
He asked as she quickly approached.
Oh, he should still be with Tom. Here, let me get him over.
He turned away from her and spoke into the radio.
Hey, Tom. Maddie's here to see you and Knuckles.
A crackle came from the radio as the sheriff responded, sounding confused.
Maddie, copy that. I'll be right there.
The deputy's gaze wandered back over to Maddie as they waited for the two.
So, what's going on? Did something happen at home? Please don't tell me your house got damaged due to mole flip out.
Wade winced at the very image of a very panicky Tom. It was a rare sight but not a fun one.
No, nothing like that. I'll explain in a bit. I just want to see the boys first.
It didn't take long for rapid footsteps to be heard approaching them, Tom popping out of the nearby forest. Water was trickling down his whole body, and his hair was soaked and almost covering his eyes if it was any longer. The sheriff almost stumbled as he approached them quickly, clearly already being a bit worried.
Maddie.
He reached out and put a hand on Maddie's shoulder, almost slipping on the road as he did so, worry on his face.
Maddie, is everything alright? Did something happen?
He began to ask her. His panic radar had been set off.
Tom.
Sonic and Tails safe. Is Ozzy safe? The house. Oh gosh, is the house wrecked again? Gone through so much drama.
Tom.
Maddie put a hand on him. She almost smiled at how he was acting, but with what was on her mind, she wasn't in the mood for it.
Nothing is wrong at home. We're all fine.
A massive sigh of relief came over Tom as he lowered his head and leaned on Maddie, the tension coming off of him immediately.
Oh, thank goodness.
I would have called you if something like that happened. You don't think I know the drill by now?
Yes, I know.
Tom mumbled as he stood up again, taking a breath and appearing calm for a moment, but then confused as he looked back at Maddie.
Then what's up?
Maddie immediately looked around for the familiar Redford Ellen that she expected would be right behind Tom, but he was nowhere to be found.
Where's Knuckles?
She asked, looking around for him at an alarming rate.
I had him stay by some of the knocked over trees. He's been helping me break them apart so we can get him into wood chipper.
Her expression quickly turned from worry to panic.
Take me to him, right now.
And just as the panic alarm in Tom's brain had stopped, it had been set off again. Maddie was usually the calm, collected one out of the two, so when she was worried, it wasn't a good sign. As the couple rushed back into the woods, Maddie explained her theory of Knuckles' injury. They came to a halt when Knuckles was finally in their view. Watching from the edge of the woods opening, the Echidna didn't seem to notice them at all. He was so focused on his current job of taking the fallen tree apart, just as he was asked to. The two observed him carefully, noting his expressions and body language. Maddie was right, he was definitely in some sort of pain. His eyes being clenched shut and his nose scrunching up every now and again was enough of a give, but a hard push with his right hand made him groan loudly in pain and quickly clench it.
So he really is hurt.
Tom spoke quietly, kicking himself for his lack of observation.
I knew he was being a bit slower than he really was, but I just thought he was tired or cold, or I believe I didn't notice he was hurting himself.
It's not your fault. We both know how secretive he is.
Maddie whispered back, quickly putting a stop to his self-depreciation.
Better finding out now than when it's too late to fix it.
The sheriff gave a nod to his wife, and they both quickly walked up to Knuckles. At the sound of footsteps, he quickly straightened himself out, acting like nothing was wrong at all, or at least trying to. He turned his head expecting to see only Tom, but jumped a little and turned his whole body suddenly when he saw Maddie, quickly putting his hands behind his back.
Maddie, greetings. Why have you entered here?
He awkwardly asked. Her expression was solemn as she bent down to Knuckles' level. She knew there was no point trying to beat around the bush with him, so she got straight to the point.
Knuckles, I know you've hurt yourself.
The young alien Echidna looked surprised, and almost mimicking Sonic, he scoffed and looked away.
Nonsense. I am fine. I survived Robotic's attack on your planet completely with barely a scratch. It takes much more to hurt.
Knuckles?
She interrupted him, her voice louder but that gentle tone not leaving. She reached a hand out as she continued to stare into his eyes. Knuckles went white. Maddie's stare of concern had won this battle of will that he was sure he would win. His gaze went to the ground as he huffed and reluctantly brought his hand over. Maddie wouldn't even have to take his glove off to know something was wrong. Stroking her fingers across the back of his head to feel bones were out of place, she did her best to be as gentle as possible, but Knuckles flinched at the touch even then. This was more than enough proof.
You're coming with me, right now, Knuckles?
Maddie demanded in a stern tone, one that was enough to make Knuckles look up quickly.
But
He tried to protest, only to be met with Tom's hand on his shoulder, giving him a reassuring pat.
I'll be fine out here myself. Just go home.
Knuckles had to accept defeat. He knew he wasn't getting out of this. The drive home was great. Maddie did want to start asking questions until she got back home. Her silence made Knuckles feel ever so guilty he didn't dare to speak a word the entire drive. They only ever met each other's gaze occasionally. Silence would remain as they finally returned to the house. Maddie glanced behind her as she walked towards the door, just to make sure Knuckles didn't try to run off in protest. Luckily he remained, still looking guilty as he avoided eye contact with her. Luckily for them, Tails had fallen asleep in his blanket pile, and Sonic was still out like a light. Only Ozzy had stirred awake at the sound of the opening door.
Knuckles, could you go wait in your room, please?
Maddie finally broke the silence with a hushed voice as she locked the door behind her. She didn't hear a response, only the sound of heavy footsteps going further into the house and eventually fading down the staircase to the basement. She would quickly follow once she grabbed her medkits, both vet and human kits, just in case. Maddie took a seat next to Knuckles on the bed, reaching her hand out again.
I'm gonna need you to take your gloves off so I can take a look. Sweetie, is that okay?
The teenage alien darted his eyes away awkwardly but quickly gave a nod as he slipped his hands out from his mittens, and the sight she saw made her want to cry. If it wasn't for the swelling, bruising, and uneveness in the flesh, she almost wouldn't be able to tell which hand was the injured one. Both of Knuckles' hands had injuries, old and fresh ones alike, palouses, minor cuts and sores, scars of all sizes. Even the dark spurs that protruded from his knuckles had old faint scars. His hands must have been like this for years. She shook her head to focus on the task at hand, literally, in this case, quickly looking over the much more injured hand.
How long has it been like this?
4 days.
Knuckles muttered quietly, shame in his eyes. He couldn't meet her gaze for more than a few seconds before they darted back to the floor again. Maddie almost shifted into work mode, her checking over his hand and being careful not to harm the teen too much and apologizing whenever she did by mistake.
You've definitely broken it, pretty badly.
She paused for a moment.
Why didn't you tell me?
Knuckles remained white. It didn't seem like she would get an answer before a whisper came from him.
I felt ashamed.
Maddie rose a brow.
Ashamed. Why?
The red alien shifted uncomfortably, still struggling to keep eye contact.
I managed to survive doing many a challenge and battle with only mere scratches and bruises. Yet I tried an injury like this with a task as simple as shattering a tree into splinters. It's dishonorable for someone who is supposed to be a warrior.
Oh, sweetie.
Maddie put a hand on his shoulder, gingerly pulling his spines back to see his face.
You have nothing to be embarrassed about. Everyone gets hurt, and everyone needs help, even warriors.
Knuckles' gaze remained glued to the floor, his face scrunched up in his embarrassment. What could she do? Maddie gave a smirk.
You know, there's been a lot of cases where humans have hurt themselves in the stupidest ways.
Well, that's not surprising to me. Humans don't seem very strong and durable.
His eyes darted up to Maddie as he continued.
Of course, there are some exceptions, I think.
Even if it wasn't obvious, she was sure that his cheeks would have gone a shade if they could. A steady chuckle came from her as she searched her medkit.
It's typical for humans to hurt themselves in the weirdest ways, yet some of those same humans have survived the craziest accidents without a broken bone. The human body is unpredictable when it comes to injuries, so are animals. I can definitely tell you that much with my job.
She glanced up at Knuckles as she pulled out a few things from the kit.
So there's no need to be embarrassed, Knuckles. Everyone gets hurt, and sometimes it happens unexpectedly. It's just life.
Maddie dropped her smile to a serious face, putting her hand back on his shoulder.
But please, next something like this happens, you need to tell me straight away. If you left your hand untreated like this, it would been awful for you. Do you understand?
Knuckles, who had been listening quietly the whole time, nodded as his eyes met hers.
Yes, I apologize. It will not happen again, already. Then,
Good.
She rubbed his head softly and returned to searching her kit. Her work mode was on, so she would not notice that little slip-up until later.
Now this might hurt a bit, honey.
Sonic and Tails' nap would be interrupted by a sudden cry of pain coming very loudly from the basement, causing the two to quickly come down the stairs, Ozzy following behind. Thankfully, the situation was quickly explained by just the sight alone, and a good stare from Maddie kept Sonic from poking any sort of fun at Knuckles. It wouldn't take long for Maddie to cast Knuckles' hand, which was a little difficult considering his namesake Knuckles, but soon all three boys would be back on the couch, fast asleep. Knuckles insisted he didn't need to rest, and now he was softly snoring away. Maddie sighed as she finally sat down. Everything was okay now, and then she could finally unwind. She laid her head back and closed her eyes, but they quickly opened again when a sudden realization came to her.
He almost called me mother.